Hello everyone, welcome back and thank you so much for stopping by. So my people, this particular video I did it yesterday, and then later on I find out that my microphone was not working. So you're going to see me unboxing pear here, because after I said what I said concerning this particular video that I want to show you guys, I went ahead to unbox the pear so that you guys can see what I received in case of those people that are living around where I live, so that you can place your order. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about Dr. Michael Okpara. So I know that most of us are familiar with the history of Nigeria, especially those people that are from Southeast. You know, according to what our parents told us, because Dr. Michael Okpara was born on 25th of December 1920 and he died 17th of December 1984. I think most of us were not born then. During Dr. Michael Okpara, like most of them enter into politics just to serve people, because in politics, you either serve people or you go there to make money, which we are seeing as of today. Like most of our politicians go into politics just to make money, not to serve people. That is the reason why you will see most of them, when they have any position in government, you see them going to church, giving testimony, thanksgiving and all that, because they know very well that they are going there to make money, not to serve people. And when you remember Dr. Michael Okpara, you remember regional government. So this is the reason why most of people are not talking about a regional government. Let me allow you guys to hear from Dr. Michael Okpara's son, so that you can hear all the achievements his father made before he died. Like, it is worth emulating, honestly. Let me allow you guys to watch the video. Just as I said before, if you're interested in this pear, and you are living around where I live, don't forget to place your order. Yes, because it is available. So my people, let's go ahead and watch the video.
To the 1960s, Nigeria's finest years, when this country's leaders in the East, North and West, having abated the plundering force of colonialism, inspired the citizens across their regions, building and strengthening their economies to levels of unprecedented resilience and raising the standard of living of their people dramatically. To the north, there was Sir Ahmadu Bello, Premier of the Northern region. To the west, there was Chief Obafemi Awolowo, Premier of the Western region. And in the east, there was Dr. Michael Okpara, the charismatic leader of the NCNC party and Premier of a region that incorporated the great cities of Enugu, Owerri, Onitsha, Aba, Port Harcourt, Calabar, and his hometown Umuahia, cities which he either built or expanded from glorified villages into modern metropolises. He was a selfless leader with the ability to reach out to people and the power of the common touch. Yet, common Dr. Okpara was not. So tonight, amidst the twisted misdeeds of Nigeria's current politicians, we remember Dr. Michael Okpara, who, along with his counterparts in the northern and western regions, stood as a sort of magnus opus of Nigerian politics, insofar as a human being can embody and amplify such a term. The faultlessness of his dedicated governance style standing in sharp contrast to the social dystopia that today's political leaders have entrenched in Nigeria.
My first encounter with him was in December 1940.
He was a gifted man, all round. There is no area you talk about or you walk about that he will not show you how it is done.
He was able to use cocoa, palm oil, and a few other products locally to run one of the fastest growing economies in the world.
That he was named MI Power.
Later, Dr. Michael Okpara took over at a time when there were no institutions.
Even though the eastern region was the poorest of the regions at the time.
He was a pioneer. He had to lay the foundation for this.
Whatever he sets his hands on, which is good, he will see to it that it is done properly.
From January till December, there was always a new project, that was commissioned.
He's a very pragmatic person, but always rooted in the people.
like that, as if he was so, he was in such a hurry that he wanted to do so much.
Unfortunately, the Civil War dislocated so many things.
I personally felt extremely sad.
Because the ideas and the principle which they stood for, their successors in many cases didn't follow. And that's where we are seeing to today.
Onyagala 1 year, that's leave nobody behind. Philosophy of the Igbo community, that's what it built into.
The politics of then was politics of principles.
Truth was that he was an honest man. He was really a nationalist. He didn't build a house, even in his hometown. He was a dedicated Nigerian of Igbo extraction.
Down forever. We shall rise again.
And that trailer courtesy of Ed Keazo, who is a documentary producer, very well-known Nigerian historian who made a documentary on Dr. Michael Okpara. Well, for more on the life and legacy of Dr. Michael Okpara, Premier of the Eastern Region in Nigeria of the 1960s, I'm joined now in the studio by his son and Chairman of the Dr. Michael Okpara Foundation, Chief Uzodimma Okpara. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you for having me.
Lovely to see you. What would you say is the centerpiece that tells the story of your father's political life and now his afterlife? Why is he seen by so many as an icon who was clearly able to appeal to so many people across the old Eastern region and beyond?
All right, let me start. Let me answer your question by a short story. When I visited him in Ireland, this was about 1973. And one day he said, let's go have a drink or maybe eat. Then he said he was living in a one-bedroom apartment. And that when I wrote to him, he decided to move into a two-bedroom apartment. So whilst we were eating, he said, look, Uzo, you will say, you will say, your father was minister for 8 years, premier for 6 years, and we're living in a two-bedroom apartment in Dublin, in Ireland. And then he said to me, listen, my ambition was not to be a rich man. If my ambition was to be a rich man, I would have been one of the richest people in Africa. But my ambition was to put food on the table for the people of Eastern Nigeria and create wealth and employment. And I tell you, Uzo, to that extent, I was successful. And I'm happy. I'm a free man. I'm very happy. And if you also read the book by Pius Okibo, Okparanomics, because Pius and Dr. Okpara were very, very close friends. They went to Yaba Higher College together. Dr. Pius Okibo was in the sciences, was in the arts. Dr. Okpara was in the sciences where he studied medicine, but they were very close. And he wrote this book because, again, he was the economic advisor in former Eastern Nigeria. So he was part of it. And Pius would say, one of the things I admired about my friend, Mike, was that he was not intimidated by Samuelson economics or the economic indices. All he just wanted to do, you could talk to him about economic policies and points, and he'll end up and saying, Pius, I want to put food on the table for the people of Eastern Nigeria. I want to create wealth. I want to create employment. I believe that that is the main reason why there is a clamor. Okpara built roads, yes, but people don't remember Dr. Okpara because he built roads. They remember him because he created 24 cups of gari, 1 shilling. 24 eggs, 1 shilling. There was food everywhere. Listen, you remember, Charles, that Dr. Michael Okpara built so many farm settlements, so many. Ozowani, Ibariam, Ohaji Egbema, Umuahia North, Umuahia, and a very large one in Ogoja at Boki. Then they had rubber estates. It was endless. It's countless. What about the industries? Michelin tires in Port Harcourt, glass factory in Trans Amadi, Golden Guinea Breeze, modern ceramics, Nigesem, and one of the best cement plants ever built in this country, Calsemco, Calabar Cement Plant. The rubber plants which were built Turner's Asbestos, the first Niger steel plant, Pepsi Cola Port Harcourt. It's an endless list. The Owerri Shoe Factory. People, you know the relevance. People want Dr. Okpara. They're not going to have Dr. Okpara back anyway. He's no longer there. But they remember him because he created jobs.
Absolutely. But let's move systematically, because obviously there are a lot of people who don't know him. Nigerians are not brilliant with history, which is rather unfortunate. But let's just move systematically and get a better sense of who he was and where he came from. At what point, because I mean, he is a medical doctor. He was a medical doctor. At what point did he move from medicine to politics? Because he was described by one analyst as a medical doctor with a humanist spirit who wanted political freedom from colonialism in Nigeria.
Yes, from what he said, from this particular story he said, which was corroborated by my mother also, he contested the election into the Eastern House of Assembly from Umuahia, from the constituency in Umuahia there, and he won. But before then, as the then Premier, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, had come to Umuahia, and he attended a rally, he spoke in the rally, and the Premier said, okay, I think, Mike, you should go and contest. And then he contested and he won. Now, when he won this election, the Premier then wanted him to participate a little bit more in governance. So he started more participation in governance. But before that time, he was a medical doctor in Umuahia. Really, he didn't have a hospital at all. Dr. Okpara's style was like going from village to village. When he comes to this village, he goes to Mbano, he goes to where, then there's a bell. People come out. Some pay, some who don't pay. Those who don't pay, well, that's it. Those who pay, he continues. And I think one of the things that shot Dr. Okpara to limelight was the killing of the coal miners in Enugu, because he said that he challenged the British.
They sent him to jail.
And they sent him to prison,
yeah.
in the Enugu prison. Anyway, each time we passed Enugu prison, he always makes a fun of it. And he says, look, Uzo, I spent a couple of weeks, I don't know how long, in this prison. And I say, well, it's part of political, it's part of political. So that would give us a background about his life, starting as a medical doctor.
So he then evolved from being a medical doctor to being a sort of political activist before he then became a politician.
Exactly.
And what I find interesting about him is something that is, I mean, clearly missing in Nigerian politicians today, which is that he had an ideology. He had a political ideology, which I read was called pragmatic socialism. So like Chief Awolowo in the West, he was very welfareist in his ideology and very people-centered.
Same. Dr. Michael Okpara was also people-centered.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yes. Awolowo, he was very people-centered and very welfareist.
Exactly. He wanted jobs. I think that there's a typical example in 1 minute to talk about. There's a relation of his, I remember, that went to, I think, one of the universities, and he was, and I think he went to University of Ibadan, so I'm not so sure about that, but I think it was University of Ibadan, but in any case, it was a Nigerian university that he went to. And
you mean to visit?
No. He graduated.
Okay,
He graduated, and when he came out, he came to Premier's Lodge. This was told by Dr. Okpara himself, and said, Premier, sir, I went to school. Of course, I went to school with scholarship from former Eastern Nigeria. Now I'm looking for a job. And then he asked him, have you gone to Golden Guinea? Have you gone to the aluminium factory in Port Harcourt? Have you gone to Turner's Asbestos in Enugu? He said, no, I have not gone. He said, go. If you don't get a job by just going to Michelin or any of those places, then come back. And as the story goes, he went to Michelin and he didn't know anybody and said, I'm a graduate, I want a job. And then they said, oh, we're looking for graduates coming. So when he came back again, and Dr. Okpara asked him, did you get the job? He said, yes, they employed me. I think he said he wanted to take a measure of what was actually happening.
So the fellow he used the
fellow to determine actually are the jobs actually there, because actually the jobs were there in eastern Nigeria. Right. The jobs were there, food was there, everything was there, but at the cost for perhaps the leadership. I mean, if there are two things my father always talked about. He says, if you're a politician, take one. Either you go for money or you go for the people. You've got to take one.
And he went for the people.
And he went for the people.
And I understand he didn't even have a house.
No. The family house today was built by my mother.
Yeah.
Not him. It was just he wanted people around him. He wanted, how do we solve this problem? It was just the same thing about
and yet he was so diligent in the work that he did, and so recognized as such, that he became premier of the entire Eastern. And it's important to understand how big the Eastern region was, because it wasn't like the way you've got states now. The entire region included the southeast today and the south-south. They were one region, and he was the premier. And he was a premier having already been Minister of Health and Minister of Agriculture.
And Production.
Yes. And his governance was driven by policy and planning because, I mean, as you said, he successfully dramatically increased agricultural production, created huge infrastructure projects, drove prices of goods down, and made life in the Eastern region more affordable. But in spite of all of that, he never went into politics thinking he was going to be rich.
No. He said he always had the calling to give service.
Well, public service was at the heart of his politics.
That's what, from what he said, that's what interested him. Money didn't. Obviously, from what he said if he wanted to be one of the richest people in Africa, it was very easy. That's what he said to me. I heard that from him, not from any other person. I heard that from him, and he said that, and obviously I believe him, but he didn't go that path. I sometimes, as an adult, I wonder, how could one man have built, or a leader or a premier have the amount of industries and agricultural settlements, Charles, put up in former Eastern Nigeria is unimaginable.
It's quite impressive.
It's unimaginable.
But you will find that it almost seemed as if all the political leaders at that time had that sense, to a greater or lesser extent, of commitment to the people.
True.
You know, it doesn't matter which part of Nigeria you went to. Some were sort of moving a little bit faster than others. True. But generally speaking, that spirit of selflessness was there.
True.
But of course, I mean, whilst he towered over the southeast and many other parts of Nigeria, because he was the leader of the NCNC, which is a national party, he towered over this country as a great achiever. To you, he was dad. I mean, how were you able to reconcile the two in your relationship with him?
My father was a disciplinarian. Let me give you a typical example when we're growing up. The idea, if he's going to the stadium, say for an Independence Day or for a ceremony, and you say you want to join, he say, oh, come, you are going to join. But it comes with some responsibility. When you go for that show or ceremony with him, when you come back, you will write an essay.
So does that mean you try to avoid
initially it was
going to events?
So
like that,
once it comes into writing that essay, you find that my brothers and my sisters, come, let's go. We're going for Festival of the Arts or something like that. You find that nobody will be, because you go for Festival of Arts, you come and write an essay, and it will be implemented by my mother. So he was a very strict person. When
and talking about being strict, was he also a very forthright person who would not sort of hesitate to speak his mind, or was he something of a diplomat in that regard?
No, Dr. Okpara was not a diplomat as my father. No, he makes his point. You know, in fact, he was undiplomatic. I think even as I mean, I had already gone to university by the time that he died, so I knew my left and my right. So I think a lot of things he talked about were undiplomatic the way he said it. But some things he just said it like that. And there's certain things he looked at on a black and white basis that I thought myself, Dad, this thing should. This is we're in new Nigeria. Take a look at it from a little bit, a slightly different perspective. But in all, I think that a leader of a people must be seen to have direction for his policies so that he can drive other people. When I tell you one thing, I went to see P.N. Okeke, who used to be Minister of Agriculture in former Eastern Nigeria. I said, also, I always like to see you. Whenever I see you, I remember your dad. He said, fine. And he said, let me mention this to you, because people talk about your dad and dad. Some of us who work with him, let's give a more accurate account. And he said, I went to him to discuss a private problem that concerned him himself, Mike. And he said to me, PN, have you got the paper? Have you got the farm settlement at Iwari and ready? We have inspections from the Israelis and all these other people shortly. What are you talking to me about? Is the farm settlement? If the farm settlement is not going to be ready in 2 weeks' time, you're going to another ministry. This story was told to me by P.N. Okeke. So he did all that to drive. And to that extent, he succeeded. Price of Gary fell, 24 cups of Gary for 1 shilling, 24 eggs for 1 shilling. There was so much food in Eastern Nigeria.
But of course, in 1966, he and all the other politicians were ousted from power by a military coup that eventually plunged Nigeria into a civil war. I mean, how much of a low point was that for him? And what did he do after he was forced from office? Especially given the fact that a lot of his counterparts were killed in other parts of Nigeria.
Well, yes, after the coup, he was in prison in Warri for, I think, about 7 or 8 months, something like that. And then when he was released and he came out, and eventually the civil war, and then he left for, he said he went first. He'd been trying to study French, to speak French for a very long time. And so he said he had this opportunity to spend 16 weeks in Besançon in France to study French. That's the first thing that he did. And then after that, he said...
When you say he said, I mean, he was your father, wasn't he?
Yes.
Didn't you sort of know what he was doing?
No. He told me, I wasn't with him in outside, after this, when the war ended, he was out.
Right.
He left Biafra.
Okay, but you were in Nigeria.
But I was in Nigeria.
Right.
I was in Nigeria.
Okay.
So the story on the other side was told by him, how he spent time in Besançon for about 60 minutes to study French. So before he died, he spoke fluent French. It was during the time that he was in Besançon in France, that he decided to go back to study medicine.
Right.
And the remarkable thing about him going back to study medicine, he went back, did a refresher course for 6 months in Dublin. And eventually he said to me, look, also I'm going to live in Edinburgh for about 18 months. Then I'm going to try to do the MRCP exam.
So he went back to being a doctor.
He went back to being a doctor.
Okay, I'm just going to gallop ahead because we're almost out of time. I mean, he clearly achieved mass appeal of the eastern region of Nigeria. You've started a foundation in his name and honor. Your aim is to widen his appeal further? Remind people of who he was?
The foundation was started by a few notable Nigerians, like Chief Emmanuel Iwanyanwu, the late one, who was very close to him when he was alive, and was chairman of the foundation for many, many years. Ambassador Empire Kano, the former Nigerian ambassador to Argentina, Chief John Wodo, who's a 2-time federal minister, Eze Agomeze was part of Barrister JSPC, was Mokolo, the late one. Chief M.T. Mbu, the late one, who was also a former federal minister. Chief Mbazilika Amechi, who was also a federal minister.
So the aim is to keep his memory alive.
Was to, or is to institutionalize the works of Dr. Michael Okpara. So the foundation is involved in research, education, research in agriculture, industry, and to a large extent, we have a lot of response from people. One of our director of programs just wrote a book a few years ago. The book is here, and more books are going to be written. But there's something very briefly that is important. Dr. Michael Okpara lived yesterday, and we must look at the relevance for today. Since the record of Dr. Michael Okpara 60 years ago is unbeaten today, then we must look at his model, modernize it, and better it for today in Nigeria. But first of all, can we beat what he did in Eastern region? The answer is no. We have not been able to do it. If you read Pius Okibo's book on economics, you see we haven't been able to do that. So we have to look at how did he succeed. We get requests in the foundation every day. People say, how did he do it? How did he do it? People are studying. They're studying. So we dig more, do more research, and see how did former Eastern Nigeria under Dr. Michael Okpara be one of the world's fastest growing economies. What will stop Nigeria? I believe that Nigeria can be one of the world's fastest growing economies. We can, but we've got to get it right. We've got to give out loans, have to begin at 3 or 4%. Repayments must be done 15 years. You give out a loan, you don't talk about, for industry, you don't talk about foreclosure. What about our products? If we produce, if you go to Rio de Janeiro, or you go to Geneva, or you go to New York, our products must compete with those products.
Indeed.
Then we are on the path for economic growth.
Indeed.
Then we are on the path to beat Dr. Michael Okpara's record. Then we're on the path of growth. But we can achieve it. We have the will, we have the population, we have the resources in our nation. This is the Dr. Michael Okpara model that we want to emulate.
Indeed. And I want to thank you very much indeed for sharing those memories with us. A very important man, I think, ought to be remembered and his legacy cherished for all time in the history of this country.